Tony Beets is the talk of the town. He is Gold Rush's undeniable star, a homage to the miners of the past who get completed tasks. However, the majority of individuals don't understand that the warning indicators were there right from the start. His exuberant fury wasn't a show. His disputes weren't only staged. Drama. Now that you have space in the construction, do you have to do it that way? And his disobedience of the regulations resulted in an enormous environmental scandal that everyone simply forgot about it. They attempted to alert us of Tony's presence. At last, we're examining the data we all decided to disregard. The controversy of Viking baptism. When Gold Rush included Tony Beets in the second season, he was constructed as the knowledgeable. He was king of the Vikings and the Klondike, a tough yet astute youngster who was skilled at extracting gold from the ground. His fiery rage and cursing all the time was merely a part of his charm. Or so we believed. However, the largest danger sign, the one instance that demonstrated the rumors concerning Tony were accurate, occurred in plain sight. The bizarre aspect it was shown by Discovery. In October of last year of 2014, while Season 6 was being filmed, Tony's team was finishing up at the Indian River. Mark, a subcontractor fiver, made the decision to pull off a small trick. On the day he left, he filled it with gasoline, a pond for dredging, and set everything up burning. I'm crossing my fingers. I'd better hope it works. Hello, I said. Come hell on, hide water. Did I not? Viola. It was referred to be a Viking baptism. Additionally, as the fire erupted into the sky, the Tony Beet was seen standing beside cameras. There, arms outstretched, completely endorsing the deed. It created a dramatic broadcast, but it was also a serious criminal activity. Here's the catch, though. There were delayed repercussions. The program broadcast, viewers discussed the bizarre stunt, after which everyone simply went on. The Yukon government, however, remembered. Tony and Tamarack, his business incorporated, had transgressed the Yukon Waters Act. They had disposed of a dangerous merchandise into waters that are protected and, just more crucially, neglected to notify the authorities. 3 years passed until the hammer to eventually fall. August. Tony and Tamarack, incorporated in 2017, were found accountable and penalized an enormous $31,000. Moreover, the subcontractor that truly poured the gas, all he needed to do was make a $1,725 payment. According to the court, Tony was the boss, and he was in charge. His reaction made it clear to everyone who he was. He acknowledged that he ought to have stopped. Said, "Given that I am the one running, I suppose I ought to have informed him about the show. Not to do it. He only appeared to be concerned about when his wallet was impacted. This ought to have been a serious warning sign for viewers. It was the most obvious warning to yet. Tony Beets thought the regulations didn't apply to him at all. Tony, this looks like a large job. We received a strategy. Yes, we have a strategy. Okay. Is it secure? I mean, there might be certain sections that would collapse, so keep an eye on your return, pay attention, and it ought to be all right." This mindset wasn't limited to environmental regulations. It characterized his connections with every individual. His rivalry, for example, with Todd Hoffman was legendary. Tony's disdain was scarcely concealed for Hoffman's aesthetic, considering him a novice impersonator. Their conversations were constantly filled with tension, indicating a heated argument at any time. However, his most poisonous, it was in competition with Parker Schnabel. It began as a student-mentor relationship, but things quickly soured. Tony was unrelenting, constantly critical, constantly demanding, and never lauding. Parker did nothing that was good enough. Their egos were often at odds, which led to the producers of the show wanted drama. By the 15th season, they were employed as competing co-workers, but the underlying conflict remained constant. It was an obvious warning. Tony Beets doesn't function with humans. He insists they yield to his power. However, if this is how he handled competitors, how does he handle his own family? The actual cost of gold. The actual price of Tony Beets' reign isn't expressed in monetary terms or penalties. Burned bridges are used to quantify it. Using his own blood. We were cautioned not only by his competitors, but also by the condition of his own family. The Rhythms, a family business, was offered as a close-knit group. However, what we were actually, it was a pressure cooker to watch. Yes, regarding that. The most startling illustration exploded in season 14. Kevin, his son Beets, desired to occupy Tony's gold claim in southeast Alaska. It was an illogical move for the heir apparent. However, Tony was unwilling to relinquish power. The power battle became ugly, and it became ugly. Quick. Maybe Tony didn't trust his own wouldn't let go, son. Kevin then carried out the unimaginable. He took off running. He didn't simply give up. He left his father's crew behind, midway through the season, and vanished a long time. One of my possessions is unquestionably obtained from Tony is that we truly don't let nearly everything stops us. I simply had to continue pushing the soil through. This wasn't a small argument. This was a son who was really irritated with his father's domineering, poisonous actions that he made the decision to leave the whole family-run company. The family was incensed. However, they were unable to place all the responsibility on Kevin. They were aware of the type of patriarch they had. After taking a break in season 15, a year off from mining in order to get away from his Kevin came back, the shadow of his father. And acquire nothing had changed as of yet. He was correct. Returning to the battle for a single iota of independence while continuing to strive for acknowledgement from a parent who declined to give it. Additionally, there is his other son. Mike is the best. Mike had to deal with a new kind of strain. It was he who flipped a $300,000 wash by mistake. Plant on the pavement. Furthermore, that wasn't even for the first time. The plant possessed previously dropped in value. However, it was rendered considerably worse by the second calamity. Tony's response was one of utter disappointment and rage. Mike made an effort to run the operations at Paradise Hill, but for Tony, nothing was ever good enough. The majority of individuals are unaware that these weren't merely inexperienced errors. This is the result of working under the continuous crushing force of "And Father, you can't please me." The issue was not that he was lacking experience. That pressure was the cause. Tony complicated easy chores. Intense. You do realize that we have $300,000 lying on the side that generates revenue section. This harmful trend permeated the whole gang. What the program was bundled, as many people described tough love, as basic mistreatment at job. Tony's expectations were unachievable, and he had a weapon. The allegiance of his crew was not developed on deference. Fear was used to secure it, and cash. He was establishing his legacy on the basis for dominance, and that's to put it mildly. What makes him like that, then? This. Where did this unrelenting, where does unforgiving drive originate? Why? Tony not able to alter. To comprehend the king, you must comprehend the man who constructed the throne. Tony Beets was not a native of gold. Poverty and purity shaped him. Grit. In this section of the narrative, we failed to observe the caution from his history that explains why he is so brutal now. Tony Beets was born in 1959 on December 15th, the Netherlands. He was raised in a tiny remote farming community. This wasn't a wealthy world. It was a muddy planet. And work. From a young age, Tony discovered that whining got you nowhere. He was not a scholar. He detested in class, favoring activity over theories. He was aware of his destiny to something greater than a life of predictability at the farm. However, I didn't envision myself as a farmer. Thus, I concluded that the best course of action was simply give up, leave the area, and go do something else. When he was young as an adult, he encountered numerous people who would become his spouse and unwavering business partner. Companion. They were a wonderful fit, having same views on life and danger. They both understood that life was more than compared to their tiny village. Thus, this is the deal. In 1984, Tony was 24 years old, and Minnie took a huge risk. They relocated to Canada with essentially nothing. No cash, no prospects, and there are no upcoming jobs. They arrived with only a firm conviction in themselves as well as a readiness to put forth effort. The initial years were humiliating. They made British Columbia their home, and whatever work he could find, Tony grabbed it. He performed construction site labor and backbreaking manual work. The vocabulary obstacle was actual, and the financial there were always struggles. However, Tony Beets refused to give up. It happened during these Tony first heard about the early years rumors about the Yukon region and its gold. The Yukon was well known, a location of harsh conditions, protracted winters, and complete seclusion. For the majority, it was a nightmare. Tony Beets saw it as a chance. The family created another relocate, to Dawson City this time. In this case, Tony began from the very bottom of the mining industry. He was employed by established operations, discovering the deal starting from the beginning. He performed surgery, equipment, worked for an unbearably long time, changes, and took in every bit of knowledge that he could. Additionally, in the frozen the farm lad from the Yukon's mud at last, Netherlands discovered his purpose. You encountered the owners of you said, well, give it a try, Tamarack. Give me a chance. I'll labor for nothing. Equipment moved the dirt naturally. Came easily. Every day, 14 hours a day. Not everyone is capable of that. During these difficult years, he and numerous were constructing their family as well. Have 4 kids. Mike, Monica, Kevin, and as well as Bianca. Tony taught them the same attitude he had. Nothing is ever given to you. From his late 20s until he created a legacy in his 60s. Changing himself into a Yukon miner who was hardened and proprietor of one of the most prosperous Klondike operations. This was the discovery discovered a man, but the man they discovered and the man they presented to us was 2 distinct things. Manufacturing the monarch. Therefore, why did we actually disregard him? We noticed the red flags, all the warnings. We witnessed the notorious Viking baptism, the ongoing, acrimonious family disputes, and the poisonous competitions that would result in any irregular person was dismissed, and we shared memes, joked, and waited for the subsequent explosion. The response, when it's very easy to take everything away. The reason we didn't trust the warnings was there was spoon-feeding on the Discovery Channel. They are primetime entertainment for us. They weren't infractions at work. Were plot points, not indications of they were good TV. They were in a hazardous atmosphere. When Gold Rush initially appeared on television in 2010 was a risk, it wasn't merely a risk. It was a wild guess. The watch Todd Hoffman and his team of amateurs who were struggling. Men who understood prayer better than permafrost because they staked their entire fortune on a dream. Despite all odds, the show was a huge hit. Smash, attracting more than 3 million viewers. They were enthralled by the average battle. However, that dynamic has a brief shelf life. In the second season, the producers anticipated that the amateur act would receive old. They required a fresh component. Required confrontation. They required a professional must confront the dreamers. I mentioned this yesterday. What's the point? That do? Already a legend in the field, Tony Beets a true living force of nature. Yukon, the experienced miner, had forgotten more concerned in transporting soil than the Hoffman personnel would ever be aware of. He hesitated at first of all. He was a child, not an entertainer, and according to reports, he had no want for a video team to follow him nearby. But the producers were tenacious. They recognized in him the ideal foil, the Klondike's last boss. Furthermore, let's face it, the rewards were simply too good to refuse. From the first instant that he as Discovery stumbled onto the screen, she realized the motherlode had been hit. His tough, no-nonsense demeanor and his loud, foul-mouthed accent made him a fan favorite right away. But he was a star because of his fiery temper. The network's editing staff at once went to work. The reality comes in here. Becomes molded. They place each juicy duel, each explosive eruption front and center. They would include dramatic music, clipped returning to a nervous person's reaction photo observing crew member, and all of a sudden, a small argument appeared to be a war declaration. A straightforward 5-minute dispute about a malfunctioning component could be skillfully spliced and extended into a spectacular plot that continued for a whole season. The advertising approach behind he was just outstanding. They didn't conceal his shortcomings. They promoted them. They displayed Tony's consistent swearing and frightening instability as genuineness. What prevented you from using an excavator on that? When I believe they placed the excavator on the beam, pivot, and placed the rock truck's rear bucket. Yes, but get a vehicle first. This was not a managerial boss issue. This was a very traditional miner. His shortcomings became his signature. This is the main reason for such cautions. Were disregarded. Discovery had zero financial motivation to fix Tony's behavior since that specific behavior was boosting the ratings. When Tony yelled at his crew till he was purple, the number of watchers increased when he battled with Kevin and Monica, his own sons. Our social media was overflowing with debates and footage. The network recognized the straightforward, cruel math. Conflict equals engagement, and interaction is equivalent to advertisement revenue.